Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar on the fourth layer of a cyber defense in-depth strategy. I'm Alan Calder, I'm your host for this afternoon, and IT governance, as many of you probably know, has been at this business of cybersecurity for something like 20 years. We now have about 200 employees in the broader GRC International Group. We're a Cyber Essentials certification body. We do a lot of work around ISO 27001. We train a lot of people. We have a publishing business. We have a CREST accredited penetration and penetration testing and incident response service across a broad range of products and services, which are all designed to integrate with one another to help our clients pick and choose and build whatever the most appropriate mix of services is in order to build resilience, to build cyber defense in depth. I set the business up some 20 odd years ago. I've written a whole bunch of books on cybersecurity, on GDPR, and a number of other things. Been involved in working with a number of clients across the broad range of everything that we do to help ensure that the products we have are as practical and as useful as we can make them for our clients. And today I'm going to be talking to you about cyber defense in depth, kind of what it says on the tin. We'll have a quick review of some of today's cyber attacks and data breaches, the kind of things which are strongly in the news, what the fourth stage of a cyber defense in depth strategy should look like, some of the security measures that would make sense dealing with a cyber attack, in incident response management, one of the at the heart of the fourth level of defense, responding to data breaches and cyber attacks, and then embedding incident response plans into your business continuity management system and management standards that apply to business continuity. So kind of recognizing the reality that not only do most organizations suffer multiple cyber attacks, but a number of them penetrate the various layers of defense. And so organizations genuinely need to be able to deal with attacks at multiple levels. If you only have one level of defense, then you're kind of toast, because once the attackers get through it, as they will, then everything is exposed. And the question that most boards and senior managers are asking themselves at some time or other every day is, are we ready for the next cyber attack? Are we in a position where we can be sure that we'll survive it? And certainly regulators are asking that question, customers are asking that question. Are our suppliers able to survive their next cyber attack? Will they infect us? So, that kind of is caught up in the World Economic Forum's general statement that cybersecurity should be seen as a strategic business issue that impacts all organizations and should be fundamental to all decision making. Any new strategy, you need to think about the cyber aspects of it. Ransomware will attack a device every 2 seconds by 2031. Cybercrime damages are up by 15% to 10.5 trillion by 2025, and that's before you take inflation into account. So that's going to get worse. And what's one of the reasons why the SEC is on the point of bringing in a regulation requiring boards to be able to demonstrate that that's all listed companies in the US, that they have somebody on the board who understands cybersecurity, they've got appropriate policies in place, and they can report breaches within 4 days. The EU has proposed a united pan-European cyber defense strategy following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The UK's NCSC says 90% of incidents in the UK could have been prevented if people followed the basic cybersecurity measures. The global cost of a data breach up to just under $4.5 million US. And how do you tackle that? Well, there's a kind of huge workforce gap, about 2.7 million people short in terms of what organizations need in cybersecurity expertise. So you've got a massive increase in cybercrime, and you've got not a very strong ability to deal with it. Some of the most recent attacks, Microsoft had a leak which exposed some 2.4 terabytes of data across 111 countries, 65,000 entities affected. Microsoft know what they're doing. You would have thought that them suffering a breach would be highly unlikely. Multiple layers of defense, but it happens. Like I say, cyber criminals are sophisticated. They're good at finding their way through organizational defenses. Royal Mail had a data breach where customers have seen other user information, as a result of which the Royal Mail had to stop the service. They stopped access to click and drop temporarily. Interserve fined £4.4 million by the ICO because they hadn't taken appropriate technical and organizational measures to protect a cyber attack, and as a result 113,000 employees' personal data was accessed. The ICO was very clear on Interserve and said, you could have, you should have. Yes, you started doing something, but it should have been done a long time. Technical and organizational measures to protect personal data from a breach. Medibank in Australia, hackers had access to data of all their 3.9 million customers. And that's a health insurer, so it's not just personal information, it's health information as well. And attackers know this stuff as well. They know how easy it is to get hold of large chunks of data, and so they continue to get more and more professional, more and more effective. C-Tickets, it's a ticket website, a multi-year data breach, demonstrating that hackers come back and back because they know you haven't fixed the vulnerabilities. Australian Clinical Labs, a pathology company, hit in February 223,000 sets of personal data, some of it posted to the dark web. Tata Power hit by a ransomware attack in October. It's India's largest integrated power company. Again, inadequate defense in depth. Twilio, a cloud comms business, a new data breach stemming from an incident as far back as June this year, where the same attackers came back June, August, and again, and accessed customer information, and that's a voice phishing attack. So you kind of have to recognize that cyber criminals are sophisticated, they're broad reaching, they're highly specialized, they're good at what they're doing. Every organization is a target, and not just big organizations, because the neat thing about smaller organizations is they don't have even vaguely enough expertise to build proper defense in depth. So, if you steal £5,000 from each of 20 small companies, that might even be easier than stealing £100,000 from a much larger organization. It's just a huge challenge for organizations. So, cyber defense in depth. Cyber defense in depth recognizes that however good your frontline defense is, organization, you're going to be breached. Frontline defense should be continual vulnerability scanning, looking for known vulnerabilities on your internet-facing IP addresses, combined with ongoing updated phishing awareness training. And that's trying to make sure that you're aware of the changing, shifting variety of attacks on the front line. You need to have a greater level of protection. You need to have things like Cyber Essentials certification. You need to have IT teams who are trained around cybersecurity and GDPR. You need to build a managed response. You need to shift up and have a framework like ISO 27001, which enables you to have effective governance. It's a management standard that brings formal governance arrangements top down with ongoing review of the effectiveness of cybersecurity controls, but with management able to determine what the appropriate balance is between protecting confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data, and also determining the extent to which you want to invest as distinct from the extent to which you're prepared to take a risk. In other words, getting risk appetite, right? We've covered all of those, and you can access the first three webinars that we dealt with. This, the fourth webinar, is about response. They've still got through. You've done all of these good things. You've got an attacker, you've got a breach, you've got an attacker loose inside the system. Hopefully you find out in less than the average 120 days it takes for most attacks to be discovered, and hopefully your defenses pick it up pretty quickly. So what do you do? We're going to talk about that today. And it's having the right set of physical, technical, administrative controls that mean that when they're breached, it's harder for them to be breached, but when they're breached, you have a process that enables you to get on with dealing with them. That's what we call cyber defense in depth. it's about minimizing. The concept is a very old military one. You will be used to it from any book or film about castles which have, you know, defense in depth, moats and walls, and inner walls and baileys and a central keep. Military defenses which have, you know, trenches and dragon's teeth and all of that kind of stuff. It's about defense in depth, trying to make it harder for attackers to get through to the crown jewels. It's important to think about the fact that when an attacker gets through, not only do they access whatever your critical intellectual property is, and for an attacker, that's whatever it is. It's money, it's access to your bank accounts, it's financial information that can be sold that enables trading in your shares, it's personal data that can be sold. Where it's personal data, and almost invariably cyber breaches these days involve accessing personal data, you've also got a breach of a law. In the UK, it's UK GDPR. In the EU GDPR. In the States, it could be any one of a number of individual state laws, and there's a growing range of regulatory requirements around protecting personal data, which will bring significant fines. In Australia, they're looking at increasing the maximum fine to something in the order of 50 million Australian dollars from its current $2.2 million. In other words, saying to organizations, you can't just treat having a data breach as a cost of doing business. It's going to cost you so much in fines, apart just from the damage to the organization, that you just will spend the money to make yourself secure. And of course, in times of economic challenge, when cyber criminals are expecting people to cut back on cybersecurity, it's exactly the time when you should be doing the opposite. You should be spending more on cybersecurity. You should be making sure that what you're doing is as effective as you can get it, because you can't afford the hit that you get from lost business and regulatory fines in economically recessionary times. So the heart of the fourth level of defense is incident response, is cyber incident response. And I'm just remembering, of course, that as I'm talking, you're probably beginning to have some questions. Please do pick up on the opportunity to ask questions in the chat function or the Q&A function in your GoToWebinar control panel. Once we come to the end of the webinar, and I'll be about 35 or 40 minutes, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions, and I'll share with you both the question and the answer. So, cyber incident response. The first thing is to accept that you're going to need a cyber incident response process. The second thing is to accept that working out how to respond when you're in the middle of an incident is just not sensible. You don't have time. If you know, to take an example of a client of ours with an IT team of some 2 or 3 people supporting operations across a number of countries and centers, had a major ransomware attack. The IT team then found itself deluged dealing with inquiries from people saying, this system's gone down, what do I do about that? How do I deal with the other thing? What do we tell this client? They don't even have time to begin to think about how to deal with the incident itself, because just the repercussions of the incident were so significant. And that's one of the key things that you've got to remember as you think about incident response. The more you can prepare and plan an incident response, the more you can operate, you can do tabletop exercises to test them out, so you increase your chance of successfully coping with an incident when it hits. The median dwell time in Europe, Middle East, Africa has increased from 54 days in 2019 to 66 days in 2020. That's quite a long time for hackers to be inside your system. 28% incidents were found within a week. 8% of incidents, though, were ongoing for 3 years. People just didn't discover them. Imagine the damage that an attacker can do in that kind of time period. Half of businesses, a quarter of charities have had a cyber attack in the last 12 months, higher among medium and large businesses than amongst others, but according to the UK Government Cybersecurity Breaches Survey, it kind of just goes on. 44% of UK consumers say they'll stop spending with businesses that have a security breach. 41% say it won't be temporary, we'll never go back to them. Of course, they do sooner or later, but nevertheless, there's a significant impact on revenue as a result of a cyber breach. And on average, organizations spend just under £3 million recovering from a security incident. People often say to me, how much should we spend on cybersecurity? And the answer is probably, on average, just under £3 million, because that expenditure should save you from breaches on an ongoing basis. Whereas if you have a breach, you've still got to pay for the breach, and then you've got to spend the money to stop it happening again. Otherwise, it happens again. Criminals know that you're vulnerable. They come back. We have instances of organizations being hit by the same set of cyber criminals once a month for several months, the same vulnerability being exploited by 2 or 3 gangs within half an hour of one another. You know, it's a seriously dangerous place, the internet. So, cyber incident response, the steps that you can take to resolve or mitigate an information security incident, which includes trying to get back to normal operational conditions within a given time period. That's what incident response is about. So, how do you go about it? As I said, think about the size of the challenge you're dealing with. Will your organization be next? Do you need an incident response plan? What should it cover? Should it cover just the possibility of a phishing attack, or do you need to deal with voice phishing? What about confidential documents or USB sticks which have been left somewhere that a person finds? What about malware downloaded to somebody's browser? What about somebody using a corporate device working from home, letting somebody access a game site which also happens to be infected with malware? So many different ways in which people could get themselves in trouble. And your incident response planning should build out from each of those scenarios. So your typical incident response process, therefore, starts with an incident. What is it that has happened? You, having detected it, you need to have a mechanism for reporting it. So a member of staff who says, this is happening, needs to know how to report it. And they need to know that reporting it's a good thing. They need to understand that not reporting it is a bad thing, because not reporting it means it has a chance to propagate. They shouldn't be going, I shouldn't have done that, I'll get into trouble, I'm not going to tell anybody, let's hope it goes away. Because then it goes away and hides in the network for 50, 60, 80 days and does a lot more damage. They need to go, okay, I made a mistake, I need to own up, need to tell people right now, and you need to encourage that. If you are encouraging it, people report the assessment, then you can do triage. You can go, okay, what is this thing? How is it acting? What steps do we need to take? Is this really serious? Do we need to shut down the network? Do we just need to deal with an individual device? And if you've prepared, if you've planned how to do that, you can go very quickly, it's one of those, this is what we do. We've already worked out how to deal with it. We know what steps to take. We can take it. So responding, stopping the incident, eradicating it, recovering business operations is the step after that. Because then the kind of loop, have we resolved this? Is it sorted? If not, what else do we need to do? And then you should be working out what you can learn from. In other words, how can we improve our incident response process to make sure that this particular type of incident, or incidents generally, we deal with better in the future? You should be doing incident response tabletop exercises, testing out plans, and you should be treating a real-life event as obviously yet another test of the plan, but you should be making sure that you learn from it. You feed that back into getting an ever more robust, resilient incident response process in place to help you. So how do you get, broadly speaking, incident ready, cyber incident ready? If you're saying to yourself all the time, are we ready for the next cyber incident? I'll tell you that's a pretty typical refrain from me and has been for some time. Does the organization know what normal looks like as distinct from what an attack looks like? Because there's a level of attack going on which is normal. There is a level of phishing emails coming in which is normal. We have to allow emails to come in because we need to communicate with people. So do we know what normal looks like? Have we taught people how to deal with what normal looks like in a way that keeps the chance of an incident down? Have we defined roles and responsibilities in terms of incident response? That's a pretty critical issue. Have we given the incident response team appropriate authority to do whatever they might need to do when dealing with an incident? Have we worked out what the escalation process might be and who they escalate what kind of incident to? Have we worked out where the borderline is between a cyber incident and something which is a data breach? How do we know that we'll be able to comply with our data breach, our UK GDPR obligation to record how we respond to a data breach? Have we built that into our testing? Are we testing our response processes? Are we learning from them? Do we have a steady month in, month out? We test this plan this month, we test that plan next month to make sure that we are ensuring they are continually robust. Do we have an internal communications process to ensure that everybody's on the right page, that when, we used to do this when everybody worked from the office, you'd have a fire alarm test once a week or once a month, as the case might be. Does the alarm work? Does everybody know how to congregate and the assembled point? You need to be doing exactly the same around a cyber breach, because while the building might not be on fire, your system is not functioning anymore. People need to know what to do next. You need to know how to talk to customers. You need to know how to talk to the press. You need to know how to talk to people whose data is affected. So all of those are part of thinking about how do you get to be cyber incident ready. So let's assume you've done that. Now you want to be putting in place a set of actions, a set of steps. And this 10-step checklist is a good starting point. Do you have staff adequate to deal with your cyber incidents? As you're thinking about, we need to have less staff, perhaps, this is the time you also need to be thinking about, we need to have enough staff to deal with cyber incidents, because we're going to have them. Have we clearly defined roles and responsibilities around dealing with cyber incidents? Awareness training across the business? Have we made sure that there is appropriate training for the incident response team to recognize and deal with advanced threats? Have we formalized our response processes? Have we improved vulnerability management? So vulnerability scanning, first level of cyber defense in depth. Are we doing triage, identifying which vulnerabilities need to be tracked and putting them in place? Do we have a formalized incident response workflow? Do X, then we do Y, we track it like that. That's an important part of giving people some certainty in terms of response, but also in terms of enabling you to work out where improvements can come post-incident. What type of monitoring do we have in place across the network, but also monitoring in terms of how we respond and how we deal with issues? How do we do a forensic analysis after we've dealt with the immediate challenge to work out precisely what happened and therefore precisely what we need to do to deal with the incident? And how do we, thinking ahead, what kind of threat intelligence can we get, do we get, that helps us prepare for longer term cyber threats? No point being able to deal just with today's if when tomorrow's come it's much bigger and you weren't expecting it. So you need to have ongoing updated cyber threat intelligence. When dealing with a data breach, you really want to be the source of the news. The history of data breaches is full of organizations saying to an inquiring member of the press, no, we haven't been breached, of course not, we're always safe. And then discovering after the news has been broken by one or more third parties that actually they have been breached, and they're then on the back foot having to admit it and trying to play down the size of the breach. You really want to be, in PR terms, on the front foot. You want to be talking to the appropriate world, the world that's in scope, who needs to know about your data breach. You need to be able to talk to them, tell them what you found, what you're doing about it in a way that enables you to minimize the repercussions of the breach and manage it yourself. You need to be very clear about who you need to notify. If personal data is affected, you may well need to notify the ICO, so you need to have worked out how to do that. We do that for a lot of our customers in GRCI law, for instance. We deal with data breaches. It means that when we go to the ICO and say this client of ours has a data breach, the ICO knows that we know how to report a data breach. So we're able to get on with that in a robust and effective way. You need to be willing to fix the problems that you identify. It's no good saying, well, no, we were perfect. We don't know how they got in. They got in because you weren't perfect. And you need, therefore, to take steps to deal with it, fix it, and make sure it doesn't happen again. Because, like I said, cyber criminals will come back. They expect you not to fix breaches, not to fix vulnerabilities quickly. You need to go, okay, we've been breached. Bad us. Let's get it fixed as fast as we can. Let's block that possible ingress into the organization and be transparent with everybody. It happens. This is the world of this is the digital world. Stuff like this happens. You need to be open, transparent. That's not the same as telling people what happened when you're still trying to work it out. It's perfectly fine to say, we are working it out. This is where we're at. This is when our next report will be. You might not want to encourage cyber criminals to come after you because you say, we've been breached. This is what we're doing. So you can manage news flow, but you want to be on the front foot. And knowing how to do that, again, comes back to preparation, having the right people in place, the right resources, and a plan to deal with the messaging. You'll find whether you talk to your lawyers or any other lawyers, the basic guidance on ransomware attacks is don't pay the hackers. That just encourages them. Sometimes everybody recognizes there's nothing else you can do. It's that to go out of business because you just didn't have the right backup in place. You couldn't rebuild the systems. You couldn't cope. But wherever you can, don't pay the ransom. There are a growing number of countries now moving to make paying ransom for cyber ransomware attacks illegal. Your insurance, your cyber insurance might cover it, but it might not cover the size of the ransom, plus the cost of recovery, plus the cost of putting in place the defenses you should have in place. So just think about the cost. Don't wait to notify the public. Those people who are affected, tell them there has been a breach, tell them what you do know and is safe to tell them when your next update will be. And in other words, don't make definitive statements until you actually know what the facts are. You don't want to be found out for having said definitively there's only 43,000 accounts compromised and it turns out there's 85,000 compromised. You want to be really, really clear, even if that means you say, folks, we're only going to tell you the answers in 2 days when we have finished checking. So manage the outbound news flow really tightly. It's a critical part of being on the front foot dealing with cyber incidents. And you need to embed your incident response process, fundamental part of the fourth layer of a cyber defense in-depth strategy. It needs to be embedded inside your organization. And that means documented procedures. You mean a top-level corporate policy, documented procedures which set out how to deal with individual incidents, which have been tested with the people who are working with them, how those get escalated, who does triage, what the principles are around triage, and all of that should increasingly be linked to critical services. So do you know what your critical services across the business are? Have you asked yourself how long you can operate with a particular service or platform not being available to customers? Those are key parts of thinking about what your incident response process should look like. And so there needs to be a link between the incident response processes and your business continuity planning. For a long time, business continuity planning focused primarily on physical disruptions to business, you know, the kind of fire, flood, pandemic, all of those kinds of areas. What do we do if we can't access our business premises? For the last few years, increasingly, business continuity planning has needed to encompass technological systems as well. What happens if our cloud provider is unable to provide services because they've been flooded, they've been overloaded? What happens if our main system goes down with a malware attack? How do we get goods out of the door? How do we provide services to our customers? And so the link between incident response and business continuity should become increasingly tight inside the organization. And so as you think about that, you should be thinking about this piece of malware that somebody's downloaded on their home device. How does that relate to the possibility of us having to escalate to a full business continuity plan and roll out a business continuity plan which ensures that a whole team or a whole division is able to continue providing services to customers in spite of the fact that that malware has propagated from that device right the way across the whole of the division's devices and has got into core servers as well. So business continuity planning therefore becomes a key part of your fourth level of cyber defense in depth. You've got to make some assumptions about which systems are critical. You've got to work out who owns those, who are the business owners of those systems or platforms. You've got to work out how long you can operate without them, what the minimum acceptable period to normal recovery is, what a minimum level of tolerable activity looks like. And you've got to get those clearly documented. And then you've got to work out how do we get from losing the system back to this kind of minimum acceptable level of service, and how do we get back up to full operating level quickly? What are the things we need to do? What's the preparation we need to have in place? What kind of backups do we need? All of those are components of the planning. And that then follows over into capabilities. What capabilities do we need to have to be able to restore ourselves? Do we have trained incident responders? Do we have people who know how to report data breaches? Do we have people who can rebuild the system? Probably not is the answer to a lot of those, which means, do you have contacts with, or preferably contracts with organizations who can provide those kinds of services on a call-off basis? Because, you know, if half a dozen organizations get breached, those organizations who have pre-contracted recovery service relationships with organizations will get served much more quickly than the ones who don't. So what kind of capabilities have you got? What are your strategies for areas where you don't have a capability in place? How do you document all of that? Thinking through the link between incident response, business continuity, disaster recovery is a key bit of building your fourth level of cyber defense in depth. So just, you know, looking at the business continuity plan overall, your business continuity plan is much part of your overall governance framework. The business continuity that's dealing with disruptive analog world issues should be dealing with digital world issues, responding to disruptive incidents right the way across the area in which you're operating. You should have a recovery time objective for each of the key systems and platforms inside the organization. You should have clarity about how the people who are going to use the technologies access the support processes, define roles and responsibilities, and then an activation, a trigger process that enables the incident response and business continuity to be escalated at appropriate levels as and when it needs to be, because you only want to escalate as much as you need to. You don't want to over-escalate, but then you don't want to under-escalate. You need to plan that out. How do we recover services? What's our response through media? What's our response to staff? What's our response to customers and to regulators? How do we prevent further loss as we deal with the disruption? If our IT system is down, if our IT team is hard at work trying to recover that, they don't have time to deal with security incidents on the unaffected part of the network, which means we could have challenges there. How do you deal with those? Those need to be thought out. And of course, come the end of an incident, stand down and lessons learned. The business continuity plan should be a highly structured element in your governance framework. And ISO 22301, the management standard for business continuity, gives you exactly that. It's a standard written in exactly the same format as other ISO IEC standards. In other words, the key clauses are clause 4 through 10. It can integrate with other management systems. And it talks about evaluating the business continuity risk environment. It's an extension to the risk assessment that you do for cybersecurity. But what it does is it looks at what the systems are, what the operational model might look like, what your supply chain markets might look like, how your technology base is going to be affected in the organizational structure, because those are all going to be impacted quite significantly as you put together a business continuity plan. Encourages you to do an audit of your current capabilities. What can you currently handle? How do you currently assess capability? Do you have a proper program? What are the gaps in it? And out of that gap analysis comes an assessment of where you have inadequacies around business impact analysis, strategy, incident response, and having compared what you currently do to what ISO 22301 sets out, you can use that gap analysis to develop a prioritized strategic roadmap to build business continuity integrated with incident response inside your organization. So a typical approach to dealing with any management standard: take the standard, compare it with what we're doing, produce a gap analysis, from the gap analysis produce a prioritized plan for implementing those aspects that will bring you first the biggest value for the organization, and then fleshing it out over time. But the faster you can get clear about what your critical systems are, how you recover them, the faster you can begin taking action to deal with them. But of course, ISO 22301 is part of the broad range of services that IT governance supplies. So we can do an ISO 22301 health check. Most organizations are doing something around business continuity, and an ISO 22301 health check will go, okay, this is the standard, look at what you're doing. This is all of the good things you're doing. Here are the areas where you could afford to do better. A health check and a gap analysis are very similar. Gap analysis giving you a very specific set of steps to take that enable you to identify how you can prioritize bringing your business continuity management system into compliance with ISO 22301. We have a document kit. For smaller organizations, we can even do it for you. We can put together an out-of-the-box and implement a fast-track ISO 22301 business continuity management system. We can go further than that. It's not just about business continuity. As I said, the biggest challenge for organizations really is dealing with cyber incident response. And I almost have the view that if you've got continual vulnerability scanning, continual phishing update training, cyber essentials, trained cybersecurity staff, the critical thing that you've got to have is a working cyber incident response process, because then you're in with a chance. You know you're going to be breached. You've taught people how to report a breach. If you've got a process for capturing and dealing with that breach, then you've got a chance of survival. You can capture, do triage, work out what to do, handle it, and get more and more robust and strong as you go. So you can, through IT governance, GRCI law, you can get an incident response retainer. You can have a retainer where we'll help you make sure you've got the necessary policies and processes in place to deal with a cyber incident. We can help you simply deal with a data breach after you've had a breach. We have a 24/7, 365 readiness assessment. We can help you at any time. Have a readiness assessment. We can come and help you at any time, look at what you need to do, or we can provide a response on a 365, 24/7 basis. You can call us, email us and say, we've had a breach, we need urgent help, and we can deploy an incident response team to do that. And all of that data is on the GRCI law website for the 365, 24/7 response time. We can even enable you to attend a training course on the basics of how to put together an incident response management structure. So there's a broad range of products and services available through IT governance and through GRCI law, which enable you to get yourself into the right kind of place to have a robust, resilient business continuity management system. And the NCSC is increasingly talking about cyber resilience as being what organizations need to do. They've come online recognizing that simply defending against a cyber breach is not enough. It has to be defense in depth. You have to be resilient and able to cope with the fact that you're going to be breached, to be able to deal with the breach and get up and fight back and keep on going. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to the end of what I'd planned to say today. So if you do have any questions for me, please do type them into the chat function in your GoToWebinar dashboard, or alternatively into the Q&A, and we'll pick up the questions and answer them. The couple of obvious questions: if you missed the first webinars, you go to itgovernance.co.uk/resources/cybersecurity #WB. You can access the first 3 webinars there. Second question: the recording of this webinar and the slides will be made available over the course of the next day or so for those of you who want to access and review it in your own time. So any other questions, ladies and gentlemen, that you might have that you want me to answer. Couple of handouts there that you might find useful. No, it looks as though none, unless I'm missing them. So thank you. If the office is closed when an incident response and forensic, sorry, let me get this clear. What is the difference between incident response and forensic investigation? Incident investigation is simply trying to work out what happened. Forensic response is a much more detailed examination carried out by trained forensic incident responders who have the skills to work out precisely what the nature perhaps of the virus is that's been deployed, who can work out exactly how the malware was able to deploy across the network, who are able to examine the nature of damage to hard drives and elsewhere in the network. So if you like, forensic response is a much more detailed level of incident response. Risk assessment is done for the strategy. Yes, it is a very important part of the OT environment. Cyber attacks on the operational technology, industrial technology environment are major, and putting in place appropriate IT response, incident response, and business continuity planning is not only a good idea, it's a requirement of the Network and Information Security Directive, which applies in the EU and in the UK. And all critical national infrastructure organizations should, as a matter of course, have in place a model which recognizes the need for doing risk assessment effectively in that environment. If the office is closed when a breach occurs, are there systems which can advise staff remotely? What if the offices are closed during Christmas and we don't come back till New Year? How would we know a breach had occurred? Those are exactly the types of questions you should be asking yourself. You need to be working out how to monitor your network. If your network is office-based, how do you monitor the network? What alerts does who get, which might tell you when a breach has occurred? How do people who might be working across the period report breaches to whom? Do you have somebody on your team who's on standby through the Christmas, New Year period, or do you have an external company who are on standby? Those are key questions that should be part of your incident response scenario planning, asking exactly those kinds of concerns. I think you should conduct a cost-benefit analysis to specify the required funds. You should indeed. The whole logic of a risk assessment is that you should be assessing the potential damage to the customer, to the organization if the breach occurs, comparing that to the cost of avoiding the breach, and then depending on management's risk assessment, you can make a decision as to what the appropriate steps are to deal with the possible breach. And it's absolutely true that some organizations will decide they'll spend a lot of money to deal with the possible breach, others will decide to spend much less. And that's a management decision. There is no right or wrong answer. The only wrong approach is to fail to think about it, fail to document why you made the decision, so that when the breach occurs, you want to be able to go back to the decision you made and assess whether it was the right decision and whether or not you need to change it as you go forward. Might be a silly question, but how do organizations usually know they've had a data breach? It's a very good question, and the answer is it depends very much on your setup. So an individual, for instance, who clicks on a phishing email will quite quickly know that they've made a mistake, because something will stop happening that should have happened, or they'll find themselves taken through to a website they weren't expecting to be on, or malware will appear in their browser. You should be monitoring what's happening across, if you have internal servers or web-based servers, you should be monitoring activity on those servers. You should be monitoring what types of incidents are occurring and have a standardized report which comes off that tells you whether you've had an incident or not. There's a whole bunch of those kind of things, and probably a sensible thing to be saying is if you don't yet have a set of processes in place that enable you to monitor for potential incidents, it's either a talk to your managed service provider or talk to somebody like us, and we can put together a set of areas to look at that might help you work out whether you have a breach or not. What you don't want to find out is that you've had a breach at the point when all of the screens across the whole of the division or the business suddenly go blank, go blue, and that thing pops up saying you get to get access to your systems again when you've paid us a ransom. Here's more information on how to do that. That's when you really know you've had a breach. You want to try and capture it before that. This is for IT only, as we have an ISO 62443 and OT environment. So for OT, yes, you should be looking at ISO 27001 and 22301. They work perfectly well in an OT environment. 62443 is a good set of very specific OT, for those of you not from an OT environment, industrial technology systems. Environment is a very good standard. It works extremely well with ISO 27001 and 22301, and you can put together an integrated set of controls and guidance that help you manage business continuity and cyber incident response in an OT environment very well. So I think I've dealt with the how do you know you've had a data breach. In a company of between 40 and 50 people, how many people should be involved in the incident response process and what roles should they undertake? Well, the first question is going to be about the size of your technology team. Everybody has a role. Your whole staff has a role in preventing cyber incidents. So all of your staff should be continually trained on recognizing phishing and vishing attacks, should be trained on how to report them and who to report them to. And that should be a clearly documented responsibility of theirs, written into their employment contracts and into your staff handbooks. All staff have a responsibility to identify particular types of incidents and report them. In other words, report incidents before they become successful attacks. You then need to determine who it's going to get reported to. Typically, it will be whoever handles your IT incidents. My laptop's gone down, I've got this problem. Whoever has those reported to them is typically the logical place to report cyber incidents to. So that person needs training. You probably need to deal with when that person is on holiday or ill, so you need a couple of people who are trained. You need to recognize when some incidents are beyond their skills and who do I escalate those to? Do I need a person who has further training? Do I have an outside party that I can escalate those kinds of incidents to? So you work it out by going through the exercise step by step, saying what happens if X, who deals with it, Y, and mostly organizations work this out by doing a tabletop exercise. They'll get somebody like us to come along and we'll sit down with you, map out what you currently do, and then talk you through a set of scenarios on the basis of what we know will happen, so that you can go, okay, we don't have anybody who does that, and we can then help you think about how to resolve that. So it's a pretty standardized approach that we can share with you about how to work out what the most appropriate way is to deal with incident responses. Risk assessments and protection measures have several perspectives, domains to consider: service level, process, transaction information entities. Yeah, absolutely right. So we'll typically say to somebody when thinking about business continuity of services, think about your critical services first. Who are the most important customers to you in value and in volume or reputation or whatever it is? What services do they rely on? How long can you support those customers without those services? That enables you to start thinking about what do you need to do to make sure those services operate? Is there an alternative you could switch to which would give you weeks to repair? Is it this kind of service where people only depend on you at the end of the month? If you're a wages bureau, at the beginning of the month, it might not be an issue. So you might say, if we have a breach at the beginning of the month, we've got 2 weeks to handle it. If we have a breach in the last week of the month, we've probably only got 5 minutes to handle it. So there are all of those issues that you should be taking into account as you think about putting in place what an appropriate method of dealing with breaches would look like for your organization. When you notice a breach in your security system, what is the first thing that you do? It depends on who you are in this environment. If you are a user, the first thing you should be doing is reporting it as you've been taught to your first line incident response team. If you're the first line incident response team, the first thing you should be doing is finding out enough information to determine what the breach is, and is this something where the first thing that you do is isolate the user, or is this a different type of issue where you need to isolate the division, or is it simply something where there's been a breach, you don't need to isolate the user, but actually what's happened is somebody sent out an email with 5,000 email addresses in it. So you need to work out what the damage is. The first thing is always to gather enough facts to work out what to do next. And that's a fast talk through a number of very sensible questions. Does anybody else have any questions which you would like me to answer? So it looks like not, ladies and gentlemen. In that case, as I said, the slides and recording will be available. Thank you all very much for being here. I hope it's been a useful session for you. If there is any way we can help, please do through all of our websites, directly come to us. We know we are dealing with more and more cyber incidents week in and week out, and we expect that to escalate through the Christmas and New Year season as cyber attackers simply take advantage of people paying less attention. So please do come to us and let us help yourselves to be secure while it's still time. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope you have a safe and secure rest of the week. Bye-bye.